I want you to picture something. It's late, October 27th, 1942. You're in the middle of the South Pacific. It's pitch black, the air is thick, and it smells like smoke and burning oil. And the only light you can see for miles around is coming from one single source, a massive American aircraft carrier, burning from bow to stern, lighting up the dark water like some kind of funeral pyre. You're not just watching a ship die, you're watching America's hope in the Pacific sink right beneath the waves. Now that quote, that's not from some historian looking back decades later. That was written that night in the personal log of Commander Edward P. Parker. He was there. He was gripping the rail of his ship, watching the USS Hornet, the last fully operational fleet carrier we had in the Pacific, get swallowed by the sea. Just feel the absolute despair in those words. 4 carriers in 10 months. This wasn't just a setback, it was a slaughter. And that terrifying thought he jotted down, we'll have nothing left by Christmas, well, that was the gut-wrenching truth that every single sailor in the fleet was thinking but didn't dare say out loud. You know what this really shows you is the rhythm of the disaster. This wasn't one bad day at the office. It was a cascade, a relentless drumbeat of defeat. Just look at the dates. May, gone. June, gone. September, gone. October, gone. First the Lexington, a giant of the pre-war Navy. Then the Yorktown, the absolute hero of the Battle of Midway. Then the Wasp, torpedoed while defending Guadalcanal. And finally, the Hornet. In less than half a year, more than half of America's entire carrier force in the Pacific was just wiped off the map. And if you want to know what it looked like from the very top, well, this is it. That's Admiral Ernest King, the big boss, the chief of naval operations. And he's not mincing words. He's laying out the cold, brutal math. After the Hornet sank, America had exactly 1 fleet carrier left to face the entire Japanese Navy, the legendary USS Enterprise. Just 1. When King said, simple mathematics suggest we have already lost, he wasn't being dramatic. He was being honest. On paper, the war was over. We were finished. So that brings us to the big question, right? When the numbers say it's impossible, when your best weapons are rusting at the bottom of the ocean, and when the enemy has you completely outgunned, what do you do? Where does the answer even come from? Well, it wasn't going to come from some secret weapon or a brilliant new admiral. The answer to this crisis at sea was going to be found thousands of miles away, in the noise and the smoke of America's shipyards. So the great American comeback, it doesn't begin with a battle. It begins with an idea, a really crazy idea. A few days after Pearl Harbor, a supervisor at the Newport News shipyard got his foremen together and basically told them to forget everything they knew about building ships. He said, "We are going to build carriers the way Ford builds cars." Think about that. This wasn't about just working a little harder. This was about a total, fundamental revolution in how America thought about building things. And here's what that revolution looked like. For hundreds of years, building a ship was like a form of art. You built one at a time, from the bottom up. It was slow, meticulous work done by master riveters, craftsmen who took years, sometimes a decade, to perfect their skill. The new way, it was pure industry. They ditched riveting, which was like sewing with thousands of little metal buttons, and switched to welding. Suddenly, you could create long, strong, continuous seams of steel. And here's the kicker. You could train a good welder in a matter of weeks, not years. That one change unlocked an entirely new workforce. You know, this is where the story gets so human and so powerful. This big idea didn't just come from the top brass. It came from people like Helen Matthews. She was a former seamstress who is now working in the shipyard. And she's watching these guys painstakingly rivet these plates together, and she just asks the simple, brilliant question from her world. Why don't you just sew it? Like fabric. One continuous seam. That simple observation from someone with a totally fresh pair of eyes helped light a fire under the switch to welding, a change that would eventually cut the time it took to build a carrier by a jaw-dropping 75%. All right, so they've got this new mindset. The stage is set, and what happens next isn't just a small increase in production. No, it's an explosion, an absolute detonation of industrial power. American shipyards were about to start launching aircraft carriers at a pace that, to the rest of the world, must have looked like some kind of black magic. They weren't just replacing their losses anymore. They were literally building an ocean of steel. You can actually watch this revolution happen in real time right here. The first of the new class, the USS Essex, took 20 months to build, which was already incredibly fast. But then look what happens. The next one, the new USS Yorktown, they did it in 16.5 months.
By the end of the war, they're cranking out ships like the USS Lake Champlain in just 15 months. They were learning with every single hull, pre-building massive sections of the ship on the ground and then lifting them into place like giant Legos. They were teaching themselves to build a floating, city-sized weapon faster and faster and faster.
Now, let's get a voice from the shipyard floor. This is from the diary of a welder named Philip Kellogg, and he's just capturing the sheer insanity of the pace. Imagine this. In January, your shipyard launches a carrier. It's a huge deal, a monumental achievement. But by December of that same year, you're doing it every single month. His comment that the enemy must think we're using magic, it just perfectly captures the feeling that they were achieving something that shouldn't have been humanly possible. And this chart, this is the payoff. This is the result of all that magic. Over the course of the war, the United States built and sent into combat 14 of these new Essex-class fleet carriers. In that same period, the Empire of Japan, a world-class naval power that started the war with more carriers, managed to build a total of 6. This isn't just a bar chart. It's the final score. The war of production was over, and it wasn't even close. Okay, so we've seen how they did it, the revolution in thinking, the welding, the assembly lines, but the real question is, who did it? This wasn't a story about machines. It was a story about people. Millions of them. We're talking housewives, farmers, accountants, guys who'd never seen the ocean before, an entire nation mobilized. The real engine of this war wasn't in the ships. It was the human engine that brought them. And this right here, this chart shows a second revolution happening inside the first one. By 1943, in some of the biggest, most important shipyards, 40% of the entire workforce was women. Think about that. Women who, just a few years earlier, had been told their place was in the home were now welding steel, driving rivets, and building the most complex and powerful weapons on the face of the earth. This wasn't just about winning a war. It was about shattering centuries of stereotypes about what women were capable of doing. But numbers only tell part of the story. Let's talk about the actual people. People like Emma Rodriguez, a mom with 3 kids at home who became the fastest riveter in her entire shipyard. Or James Washington, a black sharecropper from the South who, because of new anti-discrimination rules in defense work, got a chance to become a master pipe fitter, and he personally installed the fuel lines on 5 different aircraft carriers. And then there's Margaret Thompson, a welder whose husband was killed in an accident at that same shipyard. She took 1 day off, and then she came back to her torch. When someone asked her why, she just said, "Every ship we don't build means more gold stars in windows." That's what was at stake for them. All right, so now I want you to flip the script. Let's look at this whole story from the other side of the Pacific. Imagine you're an officer in the Imperial Japanese Navy. You had this stunning, unbelievable success in 1942. You're on top of the world. And then, the next 2 years become this slow-motion nightmare. You're watching the American sleeping giant, the one your own leaders warned you about, wake up with a fury that just shatters all of your calculations. This quote from Commander Yokomiya just perfectly captures their growing dread. Think about the strategic dead end he's describing. America was churning out new carriers so fast that Japan couldn't even train enough pilots to try and sink them. Their production had completely outpaced Japan's ability to even wage war. And his final realization is the key. We are not fighting the same Navy. The Navy they had crippled at Pearl Harbor was gone. It had been replaced by something new, something terrifyingly numerous. And this right here, this shows you an intelligence failure that was really a failure of imagination. This is Captain Omi, a staff officer, admitting that their most generous, most optimistic estimate was that America might build 7 new carriers by the end of the war. The actual number was double that. And that phrase he uses is everything. Beyond comprehension. They literally couldn't comprehend what a fully mobilized, free market democracy was capable of. They couldn't even imagine it was possible. And this number? This is the final, crushing exclamation point on the whole story. When the Japanese surrender delegation sailed into Tokyo Bay in September 1945, they had to pass through a literal forest of American steel. More than 100 U.S. carriers of all types, fleet carriers, light carriers, escort carriers, were anchored there, filling the horizon as far as the eye could see. A navy built almost entirely in the 3 years since the disasters of 1942. It was the physical, undeniable proof of the industrial tide that had just completely washed them away. So we've seen the disaster, we've seen the revolution, we've seen the incredible result. But why are we talking about this?
what does a story about building ships 80 years ago have to do with you and me today? Well, it's because the legacy of what happened in those shipyards wasn't just about winning a war. It permanently reshaped our world, and it teaches us a powerful lesson about where a nation's true strength really comes from. I mean, listen to this. This might be the most important quote of the whole story. Decades after the war, a former Japanese admiral, Hideo Yano, he's the one who finally put his finger on exactly why they lost. It wasn't the American Navy, he said. It was the American factory, the American worker, the determination to produce beyond all rational limits. He understood the ultimate weapon wasn't the ship. It was the ability to create the ship on a scale nobody thought possible. And here's something you have to understand. All these new ways of building things, the modular construction, the advanced welding, the massive assembly lines, they didn't just get packed away when the war ended. No way. They became the new standard. The skills and the techniques learned building those carriers became the engine of America's post-war economic boom. They built the cars, the skyscrapers, the highways. They built the modern America we know. And the impact was so much bigger than just economic. This was a social reset button. The war effort proved on a national scale that women could master any industrial job, which laid the foundation for decades of progress to come. It forced open the doors to skilled, high-paying jobs for African Americans who had been systematically locked out. It created entire cities overnight and pumped billions of dollars in wages directly into the pockets of working people, forging the very foundation of the modern American middle class. Which really brings us back to one final, big question. After watching a country go from the absolute brink of defeat to total domination in just 3 years, you have to ask yourself, what is the ultimate weapon? Is it a bomb? A plane? Some kind of secret technology? And the answer, the real takeaway from this entire story, is this. The ultimate weapon isn't a piece of hardware. It's the incredible, almost unlimited productive and creative power that gets unleashed when millions of free people come together for a common cause. They didn't just build ships, they built victory. And in doing so, they showed the world that a free society's greatest strength isn't just its ideals. It's the ability to turn those ideals into a tangible, overwhelming, and unstoppable reality.